I finished Metroid Dread recently, and it really stuck out to me, so I wanted to talk about it. I finished the game with 89% completion, and given how difficult it is, I'll gladly accept that. I must say, I think this is the best game I've played in a while, and it's the best 2D Metroid since the Super Nintendo. Dread is a grand, expansive Metroidvania that smartly and subtly shuffles you around the world while still affording you plenty of freedom to explore. The trend in Metroid games over the last 20 years or so has been to make the critical path pretty easy to discern, with the rewards for exploration coming in the form of missile packs, energy tanks, and so on. Dread compares favorably to Metroid Fusion, which just locks the doors at points to force you along to the next story beat. Dread, on the other hand, does this by just making the planet ZDR, where the game takes place, feel truly alive. Conditions on the planet change, either through mechanical or natural processes, creating temporary points of no return and making ZDR feel real, as opposed to just an abstract bunch of corridors, like, say, Guacamelee. I picked up on the game's way of nudging you along pretty quickly, and began actively choosing whether or not I wanted to follow the hint. There are a few cases where you don't really get a choice, but by and large, Dread does a good job of letting you run around and create a good mental map of Planet ZDR in your mind. Samus spends much of the game being pursued by deadly robots called EMI units, and they're a great touch. They pull in the ideas of stealth and fear in a way that feels more organic and less cordoned off than in Fusion and Zero Mission. They really fit in with the game's overall purpose of upending the sense of progression you're used to in a Metroid game. It's a very pointed choice that you don't get items in the order you might expect, and you're quickly humbled by the EMI and the shifting landscape. All this really cements the difference between how Yoshio Sakamoto sees Metroid and how Kensuke Tanabe sees it. Tanabe with Metroid Prime gives us some of the greatest power fantasies in the history of the medium. Sakamoto sees Metroid as a desperate struggle to survive. You aren't looking for these items to gain power and turn Samus into a nearly indestructible tank. You're doing it to try to keep the playing field as even as you can. All these mechanics, including the counter and Aeon abilities, fit together into a seamless whole. These new ideas were mostly introduced in Samus Returns on the Nintendo 3DS. They felt strange there, as they sat at odds with the structure and themes of Metroid 2, of which Samus Returns is a remake. Everything fits together here, though, in a game where you're the hunted rather than the hunter. Nailing a counter on a boss especially feels like a momentary and sometimes necessary shift in momentum. Dread really doubles down on the desperation, and it's part of how the game masterfully pays off the central themes running through the Metroid games: power, identity, and perseverance. These themes are present in the series from the very beginning. In Metroid, for the Nintendo Entertainment System, the titular aliens, the Metroids, are a MacGuffin, a means by which to explore the themes of power through the villainous space pirates. Perseverance is explored through the game's high difficulty, and identity through the studious absence of information on Samus, leading up to the reveal she's a woman. This is further explored in Metroid 2, The Return of Samus for Nintendo Game Boy, and it's where specifically the theme of identity crisis begins to creep in. Samus is sent to the Metroid home planet, SR-388, because the space pirates continue to seek power through the Metroid's ability to absorb and generate energy. Samus's task is to exterminate the entire species. This morally ambiguous act, going beyond collateral damage caused by the pirates' presence on planet Zebes in the first game, shifts the depiction of Samus. It causes us to rethink how we see her and how she sees herself, culminating in her decision to save the baby Metroid at the end of Metroid 2. The events at the end of Super Metroid for the Super Nintendo, where the baby Metroid sacrifices itself to save Samus, kicks her identity crisis into high gear. This idea is poorly explored in Metroid Other M on Wii, but more successfully explored in Metroid Fusion and Metroid Dread. Samus's identity was heretofore solid. She's an independent bounty hunter who often works for a government she believes in against a criminal syndicate she has intimate motive for opposing. She's a product of two worlds, a human taken in by the alien Chozo and infused with their DNA. This existence as an alien-human hybrid of course also ties into the theme of identity. In Metroid Fusion for Game Boy Advance, she returns to SR-388 and is attacked by a strange, parasitic life form. The only way to save her life is to inject her with Metroid DNA. The DNA of an organism she has worked so hard against, nearly exterminated in fact. The parasite is known as X, an amorphous alien parasite that infects, replaces, mimics, and mutates other life forms, and serves as a means to dive wholly into the theme of identity. Samus had to be placed in a different suit after her attack, again changing the way we see her and how she sees herself. The X-Parasite even invades her old Chozo suit, turning her familiar form into something terrifying. Samus is part Metroid now, and on the run from an efficient hunter in Chozo power armor. As she explores the lab she was brought to, she learns the Federation, or at least a powerful element within it, is no better than the space pirates. They're using everything she discovered on planet Zebes in horrifying biological weapons experiments. This upends the easy morality she'd previously believed in. This leads us to Dread, which is all about the potential for the complete degeneration of identity. A game about how something may look familiar, but be fundamentally changed for the worse, on a personal, cultural, and planetary level. Where Fusion deconstructs the putatively noble Federation, Dread deconstructs the mysterious and vaunted Chozo. They're most hallowed in Samus's memories. For instance, you can find cute drawings she made of them as a child in Metroid Zero mission. The Chozo are revealed to have as much potential for being hungry for power as anyone else, maneuvering to use the Metroids and Samus as tools to create an authoritarian Chozo regime. The descent of the remaining Chozo into authoritarianism is intertwined with Samus's fear of the loss of her own humanity, owing to the Metroid DNA inside her, and a planetary crisis as the X-Parasites spread across the land, replacing most of the remaining Chozo and the natural fauna with dangerously out-of-control facsimiles of what used to be. ZDR as a planet is reduced to ruin. This is applicable to our own planet, where everything still looks the same, but everything feels unreal and sinking into ruin. Samus's personal struggle in meeting the Chozo again, seeing their inquisitive and scientific nature yoked to militarism, being made powerless and desperate, which affects the player's view of Samus as well, and undergoing startling physical changes is sold beautifully and almost without a word by the game's excellent animation. Dread features the best iteration of Samus I've ever seen. Ironically, as Samus questions herself, she's never looked or felt more human to control. In Dread, we get a true sense for Samus's physicality. Her intense training, conditioning, and control is palpable. Her quick and assured decision-making is remarkable. She communicates a lot about how she sees herself and others through simple glances and gestures made all the more powerful for their subtlety. The game's setting, Planet ZDR, adds on to our understanding of the Chozo as seen on Zebes and Talon 4 in Metroid Prime. Their reliance on geothermal energy and their pursuit of scientific research returns, only now it brings destruction rather than harmony, as the Chozo purposefully doom the entire planet. We learn a few interesting things we'd almost certainly already intuited. We learn the Chozo developed the mother brain, and we learn there are multiple tribes within the Chozo. ZDR is probably in the middle of the pack of Metroid locations in terms of storytelling interest, but towards the top for its size and the elegance of its interconnected nature. Again, it's fascinating to contrast Metroid Prime, which is very much a power fantasy, with the pure desperation of Dread. I quite like both methods, but this does reveal one shortcoming with Dread. Bosses deal so much damage, it almost serves as a disincentive for the player to get some of the last few tricky energy tanks. It's quite common for a single hit to drain 3 whole energy tanks, so what good is one more? If you take damage too fast, you might as well start over. On a second playthrough, it will definitely get easier, and you'll be pulling off some crazy moves. Another flaw is the game's over-reliance on shine sparking to get some of the final items. It robs ZDR of some of its wonder, because anytime you see something puzzling, you already know what it is. Another convoluted Shine Spark section. Those few flaws aside, I really loved the game. It's well worth the wait, and I'm excited to see Metroid push further into the unknown. Anyway, my very special number score, I guess, is 4 out of 4. Metroid Dread for Nintendo Switch. 4 out of 4, everybody.